Hey guys, it's Sarah. Thanks for hanging out with me again today. I love it when I get to have conversations with people focused on the well being of our youth. Angie Arreola is a therapist that brings her gifts to families and kids who are in need of mental health counseling. And if we're being honest, aren't we all to a certain degree? While there is no instruction manual on how to be a good parent, we can cultivate ways to better connect with our kids while also gaining awareness of the illusion that we actually have control over them. Because, spoiler alert, we don't. Guiding instead of managing. And as Angie puts it, it's all part of the perfect storm. Let's dive in. Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of What's on Your Plate. I'm Sarah, your host. Today, I have the honor of speaking with Angie Arreola. She is owner of Benchmark Counseling, a business in Munster, Indiana that specializes in supporting our youth. Angie is a licensed mental health therapist. Benchmark Counseling was founded on the belief that we as parents set the bar for our children. We are also fully aware that we cannot give our children what we do not have. In order to teach our children compassion, we must have compassion. In order to teach our children to be good listeners, we must be good listeners. In order to teach our children to be anti-racist, we must be anti-racist. And we must choose to do these things even when it's hard, even when it's scary, because change is scary, but always, always worth it. Angie, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here today.
You are so needed in our world. There is endless things that our children are having to deal with and be responsible for in their lives these days. I feel like more than ever than when we were children. And first and foremost, thank you for the service that you provide to these
Oh
kids and their
gosh,
families.
I was just going to say, you said it was an honor to interview me. It's an honor to be in the position I'm in. I mean, benchmark counseling is, we really recognize that kids nowadays are struggling with things that um, kids have not ever struggled with in the past, and it's causing a lot of tension in homes. It's causing parents to really become very stressed out about their child's well-being and their health, and sometimes parents are at a loss. And so that's what we do. We help families navigate what's going on in the world, and more importantly, what's going on in their homes. Parenting is not for the faint of heart, and so if we can offer that support, we're honored.
That's fantastic. And what you just said right there, parenting is not for the faint of heart. I feel like that's true for even families that don't find themselves in a current situation to seek your assistance. But for those that are in need of your help, it's just a whole nother level of hard. And can you tell us a little bit about what you see most families coming to you for? What is the current trend in why kids are needing more assistance right now?
Sure. And when you sent me some of the prompts for our conversation today, I thought, oh gosh, we're meeting for an hour. It's we could probably talk for a week. Um, and it's difficult to pinpoint one thing. I truly believe that we're in the midst of what I'd consider just a perfect storm. Um, there are, the calls that we typically get are from families struggling to understand changes that they're seeing in their kids. So, a teenager who used to be a straight A student is now struggling, or maybe their grades are not dropping. Maybe they're still straight A's, but parents are walking on eggshells because, gosh, anything I say sets my child off, and I don't know why. I don't know what's going on. Even when I try to ask, "Hey, are you okay?" Even asking if you're okay just sends them into this spiral. So typically, parents are calling because they're worried about changes that they've seen in their child. Um, they're sometimes they're not even necessarily flying off the handle, but maybe isolating more, kind of locking themselves away in their bedroom, and the things that they used to enjoy just aren't really appealing to them anymore. They used to be a sports kiddo, or really excel at chess club, and now they're pulling away from those activities, and parents see those changes and are concerned about that, and rightfully so, because that typically, when we're not finding joy in the things that we typically love, that's a problem, right? That's an issue. As far as what's causing it, oh goodness gracious, how much time do you have? As I mentioned, I truly, I think it's a perfect storm, really.
Yeah.
We have kiddos who, historically speaking, we were very much like a communal society, and humans are wired for connection with other humans, and oftentimes we have kiddos in, both parents are working, because both parents have to work to survive nowadays. That's just the way of our world. And so, they're going to after school care, and, after school care is phenomenal. God bless the people who run the after school centers. But, oftentimes kiddos aren't getting one-on-one connection with adults, to help offer support and some of the connection that we have historically seen. And so, I think that individualism that our society really values, in some ways, it's phenomenal. It's great. It leads to some of that entrepreneurial spirit that we see, and creativeness, but also I think it tends to leave people feeling isolated and lonely sometimes. And for animals that were created to connect, it takes its toll. So I think that's part of it. I think also, Sarah, when you and I were kids, we did not, if we missed out being invited to a party or an event, maybe we heard about it at school the next day, or if it happened on the weekend, we heard about it on Monday, about how everyone got together without you. And, it was such a good time. And then by, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, certainly by the end of the week, it was over. It was, the conversation was no longer there. Now, kids who don't get invited to stuff are watching friends post about it in real time on, Snapchat and Instagram and TikTok. And so not only are they recognizing, oh, I wasn't invited to this event, and oh, look at how much fun they're having in real time right now. It's recorded, and of course they're talking about it at school on Monday, and other people are they're sharing posts and likes and things and so that's adding to it, right? Rather than hearing about it once or twice, they're hearing about it repeatedly, and every few minutes getting a notification on their phone from a different friend. And that complicates things. Social media complicates things. And that's not to say that we should ban all social media, but I think we have to be aware of the impacts that it does cause. I think, gosh, in terms of bullying, right? Like, you got respite at the end of the school day. You went home to parents who loved you, and maybe you had some neighborhood kids that you hung out with, or a sibling you could tag along with. But now kids go home and they just get on Discord, or they get on all these other social platforms, and there's not necessarily a break from it. And so there's this, it's almost ongoing. And then the weekend, there's no respite over the weekend if you're on social media either. There's been cases where people have created fake accounts just to continue to bully or target a specific person. And so it's very complicated. We live in such a complicated world. It's shrinking, right? The size of the world is shrinking. It's becoming smaller and smaller because of all of the like virtual connectedness that we have. But in many ways, it's becoming a little more isolating as well. So I think, having that connection, there's research that indicates if a child just has one adult in their life that they feel truly connected to, some adult that they truly feel heard by, it serves as a protective factor just exponentially. I don't want to cite the statistics because I haven't looked at the research in a little bit, and I don't like to cite anything I can't back up. But the research has consistently shown that it really just takes one adult caring, connected adult that a child feels heard by, to just kind of turn things around for that person.
Yeah, and I think I saw one of your recent posts about that. It pertains specifically to the LGBTQ plus
Mhm.
community and how the instances of suicide in that particular group of youth is significantly reduced just by one supportive adult. But we see it in all groups of kids, not just that specific group, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's because, like I mentioned, humans are just we're wired. Our brains are wired to be connected to other humans, and so if we feel connected, I mean, anytime I'm assessing an individual for thoughts of suicide or thoughts of harming themselves, it's one of the very first things I ask is, well, who's part of your support system? Who do you know? Who do you talk to about your issues? If they say no one, oh gosh, that's a huge red flag for me. Um, there are, having that connection, just it grounds people.
Do you feel like in most instances that is usually a parent, or is it somebody outside of the home that is that
Yeah,
connection?
yeah. I'm glad you asked that question because I think it depends on what developmental stage the kiddo is in. If they're a younger kiddo, then yes, absolutely 1,000%. It's well, I shouldn't say 1,000%, but most of the time it's going to be a parent that they're connected with, which makes sense, right? They don't have many opportunities for a whole lot of interactions with other adults outside the home. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a parent. It can also be a grandparent. It can be an aunt, an uncle, a cousin who's, a few years older. Um, but yeah, for younger kids, it's the likelihood that it's going to be a parent is much higher. But as they get older, one of the main goals of adolescence really is to break away from your family unit and find your place in the wider world. Who am I and what do I have to offer this big world? And what does this world have to offer me? Like where do I belong? And so as they become older, you really want to see them start making connections with people outside the home, right? Maybe it's their best friend's parents. Maybe it's a coach or a teacher that they feel particularly close to. Um, and all of those are great things. It could still be a parent though. And if you were that person for your young child, you can, odds are you'll probably still be that person as they get older. Um, and I've got lots of tips and tricks for teaching parents how to maximize the odds that you're going to be that person for your kiddo. But yeah, I think it just depends. Some of it kind of depends on developmentally where the kiddo is, and we want that for our adolescents as much as it like tears our heart out to see them kind of pulling away from home and finding their place in the world. We want that, right? Because if they fail to do that, if they fail to kind of pull away and find their place in the world, well, then get comfy because I hope you've got a basement that can uh, meet their needs, because they're going to be living in the basement forever if they're not figuring out where, and part of it is just trial and error too. Where do I belong in this world? Yeah.
Yeah, I think many of us in our 40s and beyond are still trying to figure that out. So it's a lot to put on
Yes.
kids to try to figure that out. But
Yeah.
yeah, when you're talking about parents potentially still being that person of connection for their kids, how do you differentiate, at least from the child's mind, friend versus parent? Because I feel like, at least in, my son is still young, he's still 7, but I feel like, if I have a teenage son and he is needing connection with an adult, I feel like there's a difference certainly between my son's mentality now, of course, versus as a teenager and what he needs from me at that point. And how do you keep yourself available and open as a parent of a teenager in a way that your child feels that they can come to you with everything and anything and be
Yeah.
connected, and in a way that you're just, I guess, going to have a productive relationship.
Yeah.
But it's scary to think that they might not tell you everything, right? And it's,
Yes. Which is
yeah.
why you want to encourage those connections outside of the home, because I think that's something that parents I mean, and I lump myself in this area too, because I'm also a parent of, heck yeah, I want my kids to tell me everything. Um, but given my training and my background, I know that that's unrealistic. I know there are some things my kiddo is not going to tell me just because I am his mom. And no matter how well I'm doing it, or if I'm doing all the right things at all the time, and spoiler alert, I'm not, because I'm human. Um, I think we still have to recognize that they're not always going to come to us. I know there's been a time or two where my son has, mentioned something to his aunt, to my sister, and I'm like, oh, I didn't know that, right? But that's the value in him having that outlet of saying, telling her a thing or two. And then her being like, hey, he mentioned XYZ. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know that was going on in the classroom. Thanks for letting me know. Right. And so, we keep all of that information flowing because we see the value of it. And so you ask a really wonderful question about, like, where do you draw the line between parenting and being their friend? And I think the number one way to ensure that or to maximize the odds that your kid is going to come to you when they have a concern or an issue is to validate, 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 validate. And this is tricky because some people assume that validating means agreeing, and that's not necessarily the case at all, really. They're two different skills, or they're two different things. But essentially, you do this from the moment they're born. Validating is simply, you feel X because of Y, right? So when my son comes in crying because he was playing in Minecraft and somebody like destroyed something he built, right? One of his friends destroyed something. He's crying, right? And he fails to say that, well, he also destroyed someone else's stuff earlier in the game, right? Because sometimes our kids don't recognize, well, that was, not that was right, but I can understand why that other child did that. And so when he comes, it's really, you're feeling really disappointed. Your feelings are hurt right now because so and so destroyed the thing that you worked really hard on. That's it. That's validating. You're feeling sad because of this thing that happened. And I think that's another reason why kiddos are really struggling right now is we want our kids to talk to us about this stuff, but we don't give them the language to do that. If I've never been taught the color green, how in the world am I going to be expected to describe grass to you, right? Well, sometimes it's long, sometimes it's short. You can mow it. Dogs pee on it, right? Like, you probably aren't gonna. You're gonna be like, what? You're gonna be confused. But if I say it's green, right? Like now I have a word that like really paints a picture for you, a clearer picture for you. And so we really do our kids a disservice by not teaching them emotions and like what the words are for how they're feeling. As parents, we're designed to fix it. That's just evolutionarily speaking, right? We're designed to fix it so that we can continue. And so when our newborn cries, we fix it. We feed them, we change them, we bundle them up nice and warm. But we don't label it. We don't say, oh, you're feeling hungry. Here, baby, let me feed you. Oh, you're feeling cold. We just kind of fix it without telling them what it is that they're experiencing. And so, as they get older and we're like, well, what's wrong? What's wrong? Why are you crying? They don't necessarily, they can tell you what happened, but they can't necessarily tell you how they're feeling about it unless they have that vocabulary. And so it really starts young, when they come to you and they're, and it doesn't always have to be, those unpleasant emotions. There's no such thing as good feelings or bad feelings. I like to term them as pleasant feelings and unpleasant ones. There's emotions that we feel that we really like, and there's ones that we really don't like that feel unpleasant. And so it doesn't always have to be labeling unpleasant emotions. It can be labeling pleasant ones too, right? When they're in the swing, oh my gosh, you're so excited. This is so much fun. You look so happy right now. with young kids. I also love books. Gosh, books are, whoo, there's a book on everything. And so, flipping through books, oh, this character is sad. Oh, look at that character's face. And as they get older, asking, well, oh gosh, this person's crying. How do you think they're feeling? Right? Or how would you feel if that happened to you? Kind of generalizing it. And so that's, when they're really young. But always validating anytime they come to you with anything, right? I'm trying to think of an instance where, like when your kiddo does something, every parent has gone through this, right? Like have their "I told you so" moment. Their kids like doing something they shouldn't be doing, somersaults off the couch, and you're like, knock it off before you get hurt. Please stop before you get hurt, right? Or get down off the couch. And then all of a sudden they clunk their noggin, and you're like, I told you, right? You have to like really dig deep for some empathy because you told them to stop. And so when they come over, you hurt yourself because you were jumping on the couch, right? That's all you've got to say for them to have that light bulb moment of, oh yeah, this is exactly what you said was going to happen.
Yeah, that all makes so much sense, and it's so relevant too. And I think that more so recent generations as parents have really started tuning into that type of approach. I feel like, when you and I were kids, it was just stop crying. There's nothing to cry about, or
sometimes
you
I'll
don't
give
need
you
to feel
something
that
to cry
way.
about.
Yeah, like I can't even imagine like saying that to my child. But yeah, absolutely. That was certainly said to me as a kid. And and from not even just a parent, just like people in general that felt that was their place. But yeah, I mean, I feel like validating their feelings is an amazing point, and helping them understand that it's okay to feel whatever you're feeling. You can feel that way. I've talked about this a lot with my son recently. He's allowed to feel mad, or he's allowed to feel sad, but also helping him understand that because you feel mad doesn't mean you do something bad because of it, right? You're allowed to feel it, but you have to know how to react or respond versus react, I guess, is the mentality. Getting him to that mindset where you can't just act however you want just because you're mad or sad or even tired or hungry, right? Helping him to understand those feelings and what he needs to do to change that feeling that he doesn't like is just an ongoing process at 7. It's a constant reminder, but that's an amazing point to hit on, is that validating, because absolutely I can remember so many times as a child just being made to feel like it was wrong that I felt a certain way, or you shouldn't, even adults going as far as to say, well, you shouldn't feel that way. Well, that's not how you're supposed to feel. And it's like, now looking back on that, really, like, how are you telling me how I'm supposed to feel? Yeah, super dismissive. That's a great word to use. So I always want to show him and tell him that, hey, you can absolutely feel whatever you feel. It doesn't necessarily mean it's right or wrong, or that other people even have to understand it, but your feelings are true and real to you.
Yes. And I think, when we fail at that step of validating, we run the risk of kids, generally speaking, fall into one of two buckets. Either they're internalizers or they're externalizers. So internalizers take that message of, oh, I'm not supposed to feel this way, and they turn it inward, as in there's something wrong with me. And then they start to feel anxious or worried, or, oh gosh, what if? It's lots of what if thinking, and lots of overwhelming what if thinking is essentially that's anxiety, right? And so you sometimes have, those kids who internalize it and think, oh gosh, there's like, I'm flawed in some sort of way because I'm not supposed to feel that way. Or you'll get an externalizer who says, no, it's okay. It makes sense to me that I feel this way. And so that's when you'll start to see some acting out behavior and some pushback and behaviors that get extra big because no, I'm feeling sad. Let me show you just how sad I'm feeling. Let me demonstrate for you how valid my emotion is. And so you'll see emotions just get bigger and bigger. And these kids are the ones that get described as, oh gosh, they're so intense, or they fly off the handle, or they're explosive. They can't handle emotions. And that's not necessarily it. It's that they've been taught over time that the way they're feeling is wrong, or that there's something wrong. There's something, that they shouldn't be feeling that way. And on some level, they recognize that, hey, feelings are feelings, and this is what's true for me. And I'm going to win you over in a way, and really show you how I'm feeling, because I need you to understand, and I need you to connect with me. And so sometimes you'll see some of that behavior, some of those behaviors diminish when you just by validating. But you make an excellent point that we can't just validate. Then we have to teach them the what's next part of that, right? You're feeling this way because of that thing that happened. So how do we fix that? Is there something we can do about it? Or is this just a feeling that we need to write out? Because feelings don't last forever. And that's something that I love to teach kids, is that feelings don't last forever. Just because you're feeling sad right now doesn't mean you'll be sad forever.
And I would imagine as they get a little bit older into their teen years, they understand a little bit more that it is actually okay and actually productive to sometimes just sit with those feelings and let them process in themselves, so that they can understand how that feels on the inside. They don't have to necessarily always do something, quote unquote, about it to fix it, right? It's
right.
All those feelings are just a natural part of being human.
Yeah. And as they get older, it's really fun to have some of the conversations surrounding the fact that feelings aren't facts, right? So just because you feel something doesn't necessarily make it true, right? Just because you feel stupid in this moment doesn't mean you're stupid. It means whatever you're working on is probably hard. And
right.
it says
And I've
nothing
also,
about your IQ.
Yeah. And that notion too, that describing yourselves, like essentially calling yourself a name, right? Somehow that became something in their lives that presented itself. And now whenever they make a mistake, what an idiot, or how stupid am I? Like, to be able to criticize yourself in that way is just amazing to me, because it's like you're making it seem like it's not okay to make a mistake.
Right.
Like, I make a mistake and I'm just stupid, right? I'm a stupid person because I make a mistake. And that's a whole nother thing that just always has me shaking my head, of somebody put that idea in their head, or they heard somebody else say that. Yeah. And now that's the way that they describe themselves.
I think that's yet another element of the perfect storm, right? The fact that sometimes we as grown-ups, and I'm not going to say parents, because this goes for so many adults, we don't model the best way for handling mistakes. Some people get very frustrated and very angry about a mistake, or they get very self-critical. I'll never forget one time when I was working with a kiddo, and I made a mistake and was like, "Oh, therapist fail." And she was like, "What? No, you're a good therapist." And I was like, "Oh gosh, yeah. Yes, you're right. I am a good therapist." And I think my therapist fail was like trying to be kind of silly. But you're right. I should be nicer to myself. I should be kinder to myself. And that's for kiddos who struggle with that, like, that, like, they just have this overwhelming sense of like self-criticism. The skill that I like to really target is, parents automatically think, oh gosh, we need to, increase their self-esteem. And while that might be true, I think what's even more effective is teaching self-compassion, which is this idea of a kiddo being able to label, oh, I'm feeling really frustrated because I can't answer this math problem right now. And then you tell them, okay, what would you tell your best friend who's struggling to solve the math problem? Would you be like, oh gosh, you're such an idiot? No, you would be mortified at the mere thought of someone thinking you would call your best friend, right? And so you talk to yourself the way that you talk to your best friend, right? Oh, that's okay. You can get it. You can get it. Keep trying. Take a break. Maybe you just need a break and you'll come back to it later, right? And so encouraging our kids to is this how you talk to your friends? Is this the conversation you have with them? No, because you wouldn't have any friends. And
That's
teaching
so
them.
important.
Yeah. 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 And but that's again an element of the perfect storm, because I know even as a mom, I'm like, oh God. I'm not always very patient with myself when I mess up doing something around the house, and I have to be mindful of that so that I'm not passing those habits on to my kids, because I think every parent has been in that position where they see like not their favorite characteristic come out in their child, and they're like, oh, kind of, that'll stop you in your tracks sometimes, where you're like, oh gosh, they got that from me. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I see that all the time with my own son. And, to put it in a funny light, I've often said before, it's like you never realize what kind of like an asshole you are until you have a miniature version of yourself and they start like absorbing the things that you don't even realize you're doing. Like recently my son, he's developing his little, he's 7, his 17-year-old little
Mm-hmm.
attitude, I guess. And, he'll do something in frustration, like, oh, this exaggerated like sigh. And I'm sure he's heard me do that out of frustration with myself. And it is such an awareness to
Totally.
check yourself as a parent to, don't expect your kids to behave differently when you're showing them a completely different way.
Approach.
You
Yeah.
can't
Oh,
like,
absolutely.
yeah, you can't tell them to do A when you're doing B, right?
Totally. And I think that that's probably, um, I know in today's society, it's very difficult to have differing opinions. And I think that some of that stems from, our generation was really raised on, you don't question, right? Like, and if you did question the adults, it was, well, you're the kid and I'm the adult. That's why, right?
Mhm.
Like, I'm the parent, you're the child. You listen to me. And so we've never had like we've never had it modeled for us on how to have a conversation with someone whose opinion is different from ours. And so now here we are as adults lacking such critical skills. And now it's really, everyone just digs their heels in, because I think, generally speaking, I don't think that's true for everyone, but I think for a good segment of the population, it was do as you're told. I'm the parent, that's why. I'm the grown up, I'm the adult, that's why. We were just, raised to just implicitly, okay, that's the teacher. You just got to listen to what they're saying and do it. And
Yeah.
so it was never modeled for us on how to have, okay, well, you are disagreeing with me about your 10 p.m. curfew. I understand that you're frustrated about that. How do we fix it? How do we talk about it? Right. And this is
Right.
that's a perfect example of, where do you draw the line of being friend versus parent? And in that instance, it really just boils down to, as your parent, it's my job to keep you safe. And from my perspective, a curfew later than 10 p.m. is just too risky. And
Mhm.
so right now I have to be stern, and that's okay that you're angry at me, and that's okay that you're upset with me. Your job is
Right.
to be frustrated with me. Your job is to tell me I'm ready for more. And my job as a parent is to balance, okay, I'm feeling really worried about this, and examine my own, my rule. And it's the parent's job to examine, is this reasonable or not? Is this 10 p.m. curfew something that really is keeping my kids safe, or do they have a 10 p.m. curfew because I'm scared of the world and I'm hindering their ability to kind of, grow in their own responsibility. And it's a lot. That's why I say, parenting is not for the faint of heart. And sometimes, gosh, we nail it as parents, right? We're like, yeah, I handled that. Though you're like, gold star for me. Where's my plaque? Where's my trophy? Will it have my name on it? Right. And then there are other times where we default to the way that we were sometimes parented, right? Our own blueprint. We're like, because I'm the mom, that's why. It's like,
Yeah. Oh God, that
yeah.
resonates so much with me. I can't even tell you, and it's a constant reminder to myself, when you're talking about things like in the example of the curfew, or enforcing something that you've laid out and they're unhappy about that,
Yeah.
really taking a look at things. It's like, am I am I managing my child or am I guiding my child right now? And at least for me, I want to
Absolutely.
guide him. I don't want to manage his life. I don't want to be of that mindset with him. I don't want to have that power struggle,
Yeah.
because I told you so type of approach. Like that's just not at all my jam. So that reminding myself that I need to be guiding him and not managing his life is
Yeah.
so just constant in my mind all the time whenever we're at ends with each other about something, one thing or another. And it's a
Yeah.
constant struggle.
I call that the parenting skill of, is this the hill you want to die on? Right? Like, is this the thing? Right? Is this the thing that you are so, like, it's so consistent with your family's values and the things that you find important that you cannot budge on it? And if so, then yeah, choose this hill. This is your hill. But if it's not the hill you want to die on, right? If you can't really directly connect what you're enforcing with your child back to your values and the things that are important to your specific family, then maybe it's time to reevaluate why that's a rule or why that thing is in place in the first place. Because when we do manage our kids, we send this unintended message, of, well, I'm doing this because I don't think you can handle it. And
Projecting.
whether we mean that or not, our kids absorb that, right? And it's not even always like this conscious, oh, mom doesn't trust me, or mom doesn't believe in me, or mom, or dad for that matter, right? I'm saying mom because you and I are both moms, but dads too, right? Like,
Right.
well, dad's got these rules because he doesn't trust me. Dad has, they start to internalize that. They're like, oh, well, they don't think I can do it. And our kids tend to believe us, even when they behave in ways that would indicate they don't believe us. They tend to believe us, and we send that message of, oh, I think this is too much for you to handle. And when we begin, we really, when we fail to pull back and we just micromanage, it sends this message of, you can't do it. And that's not what we want for our
Yeah.
kids. We want our kids to have quite the opposite. I can do anything within reason.
Right. I feel like that is so much happening because of we're just projecting our own fears and insecurities onto our kids all the
Hmm.
time. We're so afraid as parents and even just as adult individuals of
Yeah.
certain things that we're trying to protect them, of course, and you always want what's best for your kid, but in the meantime you're actually being counterproductive because you're setting them up to live in fear or be scared to
Absolutely.
try things.
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. We bubble wrap them thinking it's in their best interest. And the unintended message is, it is so dangerous out here that you shouldn't really even be out here. So let's take these extra precautions. And that doesn't mean your kid should go riding their bike without a helmet, but allowing them to climb to the top of the playground structure while you're standing nearby is okay. That's okay.
Mhm.
Allowing them to take some risks, allowing them to, join, a sport or an activity that doesn't necessarily align with anything you are interested in, allowing them to grow into their own humans. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. Would you agree with that even with like emotional risks? Like we talked a little bit about being left out earlier and the
Hmm.
importance of inclusion. I feel like is such a heavy topic that I have with my son all the time. And, inclusion, whether it's just, not going outside and eating a popsicle in front of all your friends versus, and even, something as simple as that to inclusion of making sure you're playing with people that look different than you, making sure you're, attending different activities with kids of lots of different abilities and backgrounds,
Hmm.
inclusion to not have hurt feelings, I guess, is something at his young age I'm really trying to push, and to make sure that he understands that. But is there something with also inclusion in regards to what we just talked about of, I guess, putting them in a bubble? Like, where do you draw the line with helping them understand that you should be thinking about inclusion, but also preparing them for when they are not essentially included or when
Yeah.
that's not possible? How do we draw that line to prepare them for those mental upsets and those emotional upsets?
Oh gosh, that's a great question because it's a really, really hard one. The first time that your kid gets excluded from something, I don't know who's more crushed, the kiddo or the parent,
Yeah.
because
My gosh, I know.
yeah, and that's the thing. It's a universal experience. Everyone at some point gets excluded from something, and so I think that's wonderful that you're thinking about that. About like, okay, how do we prepare for that? And I think you know when that happens, sometimes some instances we can sort of prepare for, and some you can only do so much. But if that happens, what I like to do is first validate, right? Oh gosh, your feelings are hurt because you didn't get invited to go swimming at the neighbor's house and the other kid down the block got invited. Um, and then be quiet, right? Validate, right? Oh, your feelings are hurt because so and so got invited to swim next door and you didn't. And then pause, because your kiddo will have something to say about that. They will say yes, and then they will like pour their little soul out, or they'll say no, that's not why I'm upset, and they'll correct you. And be ready for either option, right? Because sometimes we get it wrong as parents. We think they're upset by one thing and it's something completely different. um and then you can say, that's, yeah, that hurts, and I don't think there's anything that we can do to fix that right now. I think this is one of those things where we're just going to have to ride the wave. We're just going to have to wait until this feeling of disappointment and hurt feelings kind of passes. And you know I think that it's okay that you didn't get invited. And oftentimes kids will be hurt because there's this feeling that, well, so and so likes, Susie likes Tommy better than me. And I oftentimes, parents, the natural inclination is to be like, no, 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 you're the world's greatest kid. Like they just don't see it, right? To kind of, and rather than do that, I say lean into it and say like, yeah, she likes, it seems like she likes them better than you. They do hang out a lot more often, and yeah, they do seem to be like kind of like best friends. And I could see how you feel left out, but I think that's okay because you actually seem to like so and so better than that person, right? Like you just, sometimes we have people that we feel closer to, that we have a little bit more fun with. And that's okay. That's okay that you're not that person for Susie or that person, right? Just kind of normalizing that it stinks to not be the favorite person, but that's okay because we all have our favorites, right? Like my best friend is so and so, and modeling, right? Like my best friend is Karen. My best friend is, and that's because we have a lot more in common than I have with Melissa. That's because, that doesn't mean I don't like Melissa. That doesn't mean Susie doesn't like you. She just has a favorite person right now. And sometimes our favorite people change. And that's okay. That's how relationships work. They're super complicated though, and it does stink to be left out, doesn't it? Yeah, it does, right? But now you haven't really talked them out of feeling the way that they feel. You've made space so that feeling doesn't have to get so big to be noticed. You've validated it, and you said that that's okay. It's okay to feel awful that you've been excluded. But at the same time, that kind of happens, right? Like when we went to Sky Zone last week, we didn't invite everyone you know. We invited we invited the person that you connect with the most, or the person that you feel closest with. And that's okay. Everyone's got their favorite person. That's okay. But we never exclude someone based on, I think that's when you fill in, right? Race, religion, beliefs, right? Like that's
Mhm.
okay.
Right. That all
We can
makes so
feel
much
more
sense to
connected. Yeah.
me. That all makes so much sense. And just the perspective that you give on that and how to help the kids just sort of process that all, and not necessarily trying to make up for it either, right? Like you're helping them understand it, you're helping them sit with it, but also, at least from my perspective, I'm not going to also like go try to make it up to you by taking you to X, Y, and Z, right?
Right. Right, that parent pull to fix it. Let me fix it. Let me fix it. Let me fix it. Because when we're
Yes.
fixing it, yeah, when we're fixing it, the unintended message is that that person is wrong. And in reality,
Right.
that person isn't necessarily wrong. Maybe maybe the parent said they could only invite one friend over because, 12 kids in the pool is just too much for mom to monitor when she's home alone. Or we have no idea. There could be a million and one reasons, right? Maybe they're babysitting that kid that day, or we don't know why that child was invited and ours wasn't. Sometimes we have some suspicion about it. And sometimes kids are, as difficult as it is for me to acknowledge this, sometimes kids are excluded because of something that's outside of their control. And they shouldn't be. But again, like we're not necessarily looking to change the world, change the world via change by way of changing other people's behavior, because we don't have control over that. We can't change even our children. We don't have control over their behavior either. As much as parents like to have that illusion that they've got control over their kids, they don't. And so really it's the messages that we're instilling over time, right? You got excluded, and that is awful. We don't know why you got excluded. Maybe it was a valid reason, maybe not. But what it boils down to is we don't know. And so how do we handle that right now? Well, we recognize that, maybe it wasn't a bad reason why I was excluded. Maybe it's, maybe it's because they have a bigger, they're more connected than I am. Whatever the reason is.
Yeah, I think that's all just so relevant and such good advice, because I think that you're right in that it more often is the parent that is feeling that sting more than the kid even. But that's great advice on how to work through that. What do you think about how we can be honest with our kids about the different things that are happening in the world, the different really and truly heavy things in the world, And how do you differentiate to them? How do you explain to them in a way that isn't traumatizing or even othering, right? And making it seem like, well, that's other people doing that, it's not us. And how do you talk to your kids about that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And when I saw that one on your list of prompts, I was like, okay, this one's big. And I think again, this is something that contributes to that perfect storm, because I oftentimes see kiddos who walk through the door, and whether they're matched with me or one of my interns, because that's something that we do at Benchmark Counseling. Is I have a training program where I train interns, so that we've got good, solid clinicians entering the world. Oftentimes, when I see kiddos coming in struggling with their mental health, the parents are also struggling, whether the parents recognize it or not. And sometimes they're struggling because their child is struggling and they don't know how to deal with it. And sometimes they're just struggling because it feels like society's circling the drain, and any day the end is near, right? Because there's so many heavy things happening so quickly, one after the other. And so number one, parents have to be getting their own support. They have to be getting their own emotional needs met. And whether that's through their support system or oftentimes their own mental health therapist, they have to prioritize themselves. It's very
so
much
important.
It's so that's step number one. Step number one is making sure that you as the parent are you've got this. I like to use the analogy of when an airplane hits turbulence, right? Do you want a flight attendant who's like, oh, good morning, passengers, please buckle up, we're hitting some rough turbulence, but it should only last about 5-10 minutes, so we'll turn the seatbelt sign off when you can get up again? Or do you want a flight attendant who says, oh my gosh, what was that? Like, did you feel that? I felt it. Did you feel, oh my gosh, should we talk to the pilot? What do you think we should do, right? You want someone who is taking charge. And even if they have no idea what the heck they're doing, you want them to give the illusion that they are okay, right? You want them to give, and we really need to give our kids the illusion that everything's going to be okay. And we do not do that through lying, though. We do not withhold information or say, oh yeah, everything's going to be fine. Instead, you point to, you know what, I don't know what's going to happen, but what I do know is you have lots of people that love you. And that if you're wanting to talk about some of this, or if you're feeling scared, you can talk to mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle, cousin, teacher. You start listing off, who are those grown-ups? Who are those grown-ups that you want them to feel connected to? You give them the green light. If you don't want to talk to me, that's okay. You go find grandma, or I'll drop you off at, your aunt's house, right? And so it's pairing an explanation of events in an age appropriate way, followed by, what's the game plan? What can they do to feel safe? Maybe it's spending the night at grandma's house, or maybe it's, planning some sort of fun activity, or journaling, or coloring, or, any sort of thing that makes them, makes them feel good. But really, that middle part of finding a way to explain things in an age appropriate way, it can be tricky to do that. Luckily, there's a lot of resources out there for parents. I strongly, in most instances, I strongly discourage Googling, but this is one of those instances, because Google just spits back so many different results. But this is one of those instances where I think Googling is phenomenal, right? You just Google, how do I explain X event to my child? And there are loads of us clinicians out there who have blogs, who actually, a really great website is the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, so nctsn.org. They have a section for parents, a section for clinicians, a section for the media, on how to approach some of these really hard and difficult, potentially traumatic conversations. So it's all about being honest with our kids and explaining it in a way that they can understand, based on how old they are, followed by how what are we doing to keep them safe? How are we addressing this in our day-to-day? And when you take that last step of, what are we doing about this? I think that also prevents a bit of that othering that we run the risk of. Yeah, because we are part of this, right? Like, this is what we're doing. This is how we're helping.
Right. That is just such valuable information. So many gems you just said in that description there. I'm really going to be taking that all in, and, re-listening and adjusting my mindset and a lot of things that you've said today. And as you said, like, when I initially reached out to you to be part of this podcast, and the list I sent you, I'm like, we're going to be talking for days, because there's just like no way, like, every topic we've even discussed thus far, I mean, it could be its own like 2-hour podcast. Definitely, for sure. If definitely,
we've we've only scratched the surface. Yeah,
I know, but it's even just this little bit has been so valuable. I know to myself, and the listeners are gonna just absorb all this and have all these aha moments as well, I feel like. Can you talk a little bit, lastly, in this conversation today, because I cannot even believe where this time has gone, and I want to be respectful of your time. There is something that I saw that you posted on Facebook, I believe it was on your social on Facebook, about the Giving Tree alternate ending, and how it talks about kids, the boundary setting for kids, and how kids need to set them, but also being able to receive them as a kid too. That was just such an amazing thing for me to read, because I do love that book, and I loved it as a kid, and I've read it to my son several times. And then I read that alternate ending where the tree was like, no, you can't take my, branches and trunk and go build a house and a boat. No, you're not going to like take my entire livelihood away from me just so you can have what you want. And I just thought that was amazing. I never even considered that book from that viewpoint before. And we talk we talk so much about boundaries nowadays, and setting them so that we don't overextend ourselves, and so that people treat us the way that we expect and want to be treated. And to have that in a child's book like that, please tell me a little bit about just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, my thoughts are that I like boundaries, and I'm kind of chuckling because you can't see because we're on Zoom, but if I lower my camera, my t-shirt. Can you read it? Or just listen?
Oh, setting boundaries like it's my job. That is fantastic. I love
Setting
that.
boundaries like it's my job, right? Because and I think boundaries has gotten this negative connotation, right? There's this, like, they feel gross. It's boundary has become this um just this word for another word for no. And
Mhm.
I don't view boundaries like that at all. Boundaries are what keep us safe, right? Like, we fence the backyard so that no wild animals come in and gobble up our puppy, or our
Mhm.
small children while they're out there, right? Or we fence it in to keep us, keep our children from wandering off, right? So boundaries are not, they're not this dirty word. They're not another word for no. They are, they're kind of like a cheat sheet, right? So if I set a boundary, I'm telling you exactly how I want to be treated in our relationship so that we can thrive, right? If I give you the cheat sheet, I mean, if you've got the cheat sheet to Friday's algebra test, right? Or how many of us have had one of those teachers in the past where they allow you like an index card, right? To you
Yeah.
jot down any codes and formulas you want on the index card, right? Like, gosh, didn't we absolutely adore those teachers? And it's
In the
not
most
that
tiny writing ever.
in the most tiny writing ever, right? And you covered it front to back. And yes, yes. And so
Yep.
it's really, boundaries are really, I like to view them as the cheat sheet. If I set a boundary and I'm clear about what that boundary is, now you know how to be successful in our relationship together, no matter what that relationship is: parent child, romantic relationships, friendships, right? Um, it really is, it's really the instruction manual for how I would like to see our relationship work. Yeah.
Gosh, that is so incredibly valuable. The instruction manual of how I would like to see our relationship work. I recently published an episode where we talked about disclosures at the beginning of every relationship. And it's kind of the same thing. It's like, this is what
Absolutely.
you should expect from me, and this is hope to expect from you. And I just don't think that it should all be spontaneously figured out along the way, right? It just doesn't make sense for
Right.
that to happen, because you're ultimately going to have disappointment, and then ultimately resentments, and then hurt
Right.
feelings. So it all
Yeah.
makes so
Yeah.
much sense.
Yeah. And I
It
think
is
if
so, it is
you,
so valuable.
yeah, and I think if you have that mindset of a boundary being this cheat sheet or this instruction manual, then it also makes it so much easier to receive someone else's boundaries, to hear someone else's boundaries as, oh, no, 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 this is not a no. This is not being bossy. This is the cheat sheet for how I can make this person happy and feel safe and comfortable in my presence. And so thank you for that information, right? I mean, it takes work to get there. Definitely takes work to get
Yeah.
there.
I
But
think it all kind of comes back to that, really, as humans, we all want to be heard, we all want to be seen. And if
yep,
we can just be a little bit more
absolutely.
clear about what that means for us from the get-go, I think there's be a lot more harmonious interactions.
Yes, for sure. For sure. Right. Rather than having someone guess and fumble their way through it, and us feeling more and more frustrated and exasperated and, oh, you must not
Yeah.
really love me. No, 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 I do. I'm trying. This is why I keep messing up, because I keep trying. So just be clear, right? I
Be clear.
need I need XYZ. I would like to see XYZ, right?
Yeah. Especially with your kids, right? Because they might not always have the words or the understanding to really
Mhm.
know what, you know, is expected next of them. So to be able to just have those X, Y, and Z's spelled out for them from the get-go,
Mhm.
just remove
Yeah,
the confusion.
right. Exactly. I always call it setting them up for success, right? Tell them exactly what you want to see. Um,
Mhm.
Drop the don't from your vocabulary. Don't do XYZ. Instead, tell them what you'd like to see, right? So your kid's standing on the kitchen counter.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, don't stand on the counter, right? Because now, okay, well, what does that look like? What does that mean? That now they've got to figure out They've got to guess at what you want them to do instead. And, oh, okay, so should I maybe climb on top of the fridge? Right? I mean, and so if you use a lot of don't language, you end up, don't do this, don't do it. It just becomes circular, so that you end up, it ends up where you're having to use more don't language. But if you walk in and your kiddo's on the counter, you say, please get down from the counter, right? Please
Right.
keep your feet on the floor, right? Okay, if my feet are on the floor, mom's happy,
It
right?
seems like
Now,
something that should be an easy expectation for the kids to understand, but quite honestly, they're in a completely different developmental part of their life than we are as
absolutely.
adults. And
Yeah.
to just expect them to know what we want or what is
Hmm.
okay and not okay is really irrational on the part of the parent, I feel like.
Right, right. And that's really, I mean, we know it's not okay to stand on counters because we've been alive for, a long time. I'm not going to give
Right.
away my age. um, and so we've, through trial and error, have figured it out, and that's what they're doing, trial and error. But when you tell them keep your feet on the floor, well, now they're not going to be jumping on the bed. They're not going to be jumping on the couch. They're not going to be, right, because you've told them what the expectation is. You keep your feet on the floor.
Right.
So it eliminates, having to go around throughout the whole house all day saying, don't do that, don't climb on that, don't, right? Please keep your feet on the floor. Please tell them exactly what you want them to see. Tell them exactly what you want to see them doing. Yeah.
Right. It all just makes so much sense. Angie, I have loved this conversation, and I'll be begging you to come back and have another one with me because, like I said, we've not even scratched the surface of
Yes.
this at
Yes. Let's talk.
all.
I mean, let's talk about, earlier you mentioned that pressure that adolescents feel to like figure it out. Yeah. Let's talk about that. And
Yeah.
what I actually mean by that, right? Because some parents assume that that means, oh, my kid has to have their, college major declared by junior year. And good golly, that is not at all what I mean. And so
No.
clarifying that would be awesome. Just talking about, the pressures of adolescence and all of that's coming down on our kiddos nowadays.
All
Yeah,
right. Well, you
or
heard it here,
any of
everybody.
it,
Angie's coming
right?
back. We're going to be talking about pressures of adolescence on our adolescents
Yeah,
to
yeah.
figure it out in life. So you can look ahead for that conversation. I can't wait to share this one with everybody because it was just so informative and relevant and on point. Angie, tell us where everybody can find you and how they can connect with you.
Yeah, so probably the easiest place to find me is at benchmark-counseling.com. That's our website. You'll find a contact page there, or you can email me directly at hello@benchmark-counseling.com. Those are probably the easiest ways. We also offer free consultations that can be scheduled directly through our website. There's a link to schedule your free consultation. So those are probably the easiest ways to get a hold of us.
That's
Thank you.
fantastic. All that
Yeah.
information will, of course, be in the show notes as well. So you can, just copy and paste or click on the links there to connect with Angie and, get some more of her insight into just helping your kids and yourselves as a parent be better and more productive humans. Angie, thank you so much for joining me today. I look forward to sharing this conversation.
Thank you, Sarah. I absolutely adore having these sorts of conversations because, in all honesty, it just makes my job easier as a therapist when I have a parent coming in saying, hey, these are the things we're trying to implement at home, but here are the roadblocks. Here's where we're getting stuck. It makes my job easier. So thank you. Thank you so much for making my job easier.
We appreciate you. You're so needed. Till next time.
Yeah. Yes.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
I'm so thankful for people like Angie who can help our kids find their way back to themselves when the pressures of this world try to dampen their spirits. There are, of course, many paths for families to obtain support and guidance to creating a healthy dynamic. I've always thought counseling and therapy to be underappreciated because, be it for our kids, a marriage, during times of grief, or just navigating life. No, I absolutely don't have all the know-hows or answers. But I think a lot of us pretend to. Because what? Shame? Fear? Maybe judgments? Judgments of the world knowing we don't know it all? Fear because we can't go at it alone? That's a prideful ego. I don't want it in my heart and mind. Angie can be found at benchmark-counseling.com. Reach out if your kiddos and your families need support. Here were my takeaways today. 1. Make sure you manifest relationships. Kids should have an adult they can connect with in a healthy way, even if it's not you as the parent. 2. Validate. Validate what they feel. It doesn't mean that you're agreeing with them. It means you acknowledge. Let them know you see them. 3. Feelings aren't facts. Just because you tell yourself something like, I'm ugly or I'm stupid, it doesn't make it true. 4. Often, if our kids are struggling, so are parents. Ask yourself if what your kid is having a hard time with could be a projection of something from your own life. I'm looking forward to more discussions with Angie, and I hope to see you there too. Be sure to follow her on social media. All ways of connecting are in the show notes. And thank you to all who keep showing up and sharing your time with me today. I'd love it if you shared today's episode with a friend. Also, be sure to rate and review. It's an incredible help to me when you take the time to do so. Look for more ways to stay connected in the show notes. Enjoy your day, loves, and I'll see you next time.